My name is Maris Colvin. On my 58th birthday, I walked into what I thought was a routine meeting, only to be told I was being replaced by the very woman I'd trained for 6 months. No warning, no apology, just a folder and a smile. I felt gutted. But that day, something inside me broke, and then rebuilt stronger. I didn't beg. I walked away. Please listen to the full story and tell me, was I right to leave without looking back? Would you have done the same? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. It was raining the morning I turned 58. The kind of early October rain that seeps through the cracks in your coat collar and soaks you before you've even made it to your car. Still, I packed up the cupcakes, vanilla with cream cheese frosting, my granddaughter's favorite recipe, and headed in like it was just another Friday. But it wasn't. Not really. Something about the air felt off. Not the weather, not exactly. It was in the way my office light flickered even though the bulb was new, or how the receptionist barely looked up when I walked past. Maybe it had started weeks before, tiny signals I refused to name. Like how people in the hallway suddenly got very interested in their phones when I walked by. Like how Cynthia had stopped calling me into meetings I used to run. Or maybe it was what I felt but couldn't say out loud. I was being edited out of the company I helped build. They stopped looking me in the eye 3 weeks before my birthday. Rainford Mutual used to be a different place. Back when we still wore pantyhose and faxed things, it felt like family. I started as a claims typist in '91, worked my way up to senior training specialist. 32 years of getting it done. Quietly, reliably. I trained 5 full departments over the decades. I'd seen trends come and go, saw managers panic over digitization like it was the apocalypse. But I adapted. Every time. Until now. Now the building looked the same, but the people didn't. After the acquisition, things moved fast. The new executive team started calling everything an ecosystem. Suddenly, experience became legacy baggage, and the interns came in with personal stylists and branding consultants. They gave feedback in emojis and led strategy sessions on Instagram engagement. I kept my head down. I figured I'd ride out the storm. And then came Cynthia Creel. She walked in with shiny heels and a frozen kind of smile, the kind that says she's already measured your worth before you said a word. VP of Human Resources. Barely 40, from a coastal branch office with a reputation for streamlining. Her favorite phrase was, "We're pivoting fast," which usually meant, get out of the way if you don't make the quarterly look prettier. At first, she was all charm. She'd call me our institutional encyclopedia, which sounded like a compliment until I realized it made me sound like a dusty book nobody reads. She assigned me to train Kaylin Shore, a bubbly, camera-ready 20-something with a bright blazer and brighter ambition. Kaylin had no experience in insurance, but she could speak in sound bites, and that seemed to be enough. I gave it my all. Of course I did. That's who I am. I spent 6 months showing Kaylin everything: how to spot red flags in a claim before it became a legal nightmare, how to decode language buried in compliance memos, even how to hold her ground in tense meetings. I told myself I was paying it forward. I told myself a lot of things. The morning of my birthday, I opened my inbox and found a message from Cynthia. Subject line: Q4 alignment session urgent. The body was short, chirpy. Looking forward to aligning on future transitions. Please bring your training notes for Kaylin. I read that line 3 times. Bring your training notes for Kaylin. That's when I felt the chill, and it had nothing to do with the rain. In the elevator, Kaylin was all smiles. She told me Cynthia had encouraged her to apply for a new hybrid role in leadership. Said she wasn't sure what it meant exactly, but it sounded promising. That's great, I said, managing a smile. Inside, my stomach twisted. It was my birthday. I brought the cupcakes. And I was walking into a meeting I hadn't scheduled. The hallway to the 5th floor felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was me finally hearing what had always been there. The truth I hadn't wanted to face. When I stepped into the conference room, I saw the manila folder right away. It was placed carefully in the center of the polished table like it had been waiting just for me. Cynthia was already seated. She stood up with that practiced PR smile and said, "Happy birthday, Maris." Let's talk about transition. My hands didn't shake. Not then. I sat down slowly, eyes on that folder, already knowing what was inside. I had seen too many of them prepared for other people over the years. But this one had my name on it. That was the moment it hit me, fully, deeply, with no cushion. I trained my replacement. I even wrote the manual. But I never trained myself to expect betrayal. The meeting wasn't a meeting. Cynthia started with that syrupy tone she used in every corporate video, the one that tried to make change sound like opportunity and layoffs feel like evolution. As we move into Q4, she said, hands folded neatly on the table, Rainford is entering a phase of transformation. We need a leadership approach that reflects fresh energy, agility, and alignment with our new brand ethos. I remember the way she said fresh energy, like she was complimenting a scented candle. Then she smiled across the table, and I realized I was supposed to nod. I didn't. I waited. She tapped the manila folder in front of her like it held the weather forecast, and not the end of 32 years. Maris, you've been the backbone of our training structure for a long time, and we deeply appreciate everything you've given Rainford. But as of this quarter, your role no longer fits within the revised organizational framework. She said it so gently, so professionally. I almost missed the fact that I'd just been fired. No performance review. No warning. Just a folder, a speech, and the assumption that I'd go quietly. I cleared my throat, not because I had something to say, but because I needed to hear myself make a sound. Any sound. Cynthia opened the folder and slid a piece of paper forward. This is your transition package. Generous severance. 3 months of benefits continuation. And, of course, we'd love your help over the next 2 weeks to ensure a smooth handoff to Kaylin. That's when it cut. She said it like it was a baton in a relay race. My work, my systems, my handwritten notes on how to de-escalate angry clients, how to spot legal flags buried in claim language, how to onboard trainees from different cultural backgrounds. All of it was just a handoff. She didn't even pause. Cynthia looked down at my file and nodded approvingly, like she was commenting on a cake recipe. Your training documentation is exceptional. Kaylin will benefit tremendously from it. I couldn't even speak. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't know which part hurt more, being dismissed or being used like a resource until the moment I wasn't needed. The silence between us felt loud. I stood slowly, making sure my legs wouldn't betray me. She stood too, still polite, still smiling. Let me know if you'd like to schedule an exit interview. I didn't respond. I walked out.
No one made eye contact as I passed.
Not even the receptionist. I made it to the staff lounge before the tears came, not falling, but burning behind my eyes like smoke. I sat down, jacket still soaked from the rain, and reached into my coat pocket for something to hold on to. It was my Rainford 30-year pin. I'd kept it in my jacket since the anniversary luncheon last spring. I held it in my palm like it meant something. And then I took it off. Not angrily. Just with finality. Like peeling off a sticker you wore too long. I don't remember how long I sat there before my phone buzzed. It was Inez. She always had a way of knowing. Maris, she said, skipping hello. I heard. My voice cracked when I answered. I didn't even see it coming. Oh, honey, she sighed. They count on that. Inez Weller wasn't family, but she might as well have been. She'd been through her own version of this a decade ago, VP at a different company, let go under the guise of departmental consolidation after refusing to fudge a quarterly report. They don't fire people like us for failing, she said. They fire us because we remind them they're replaceable. I sat in silence, letting the words settle. She kept talking softer now. Cynthia's done this before, you know. Same thing at Whitcroft Financial. Got rid of 3 senior staffers, brought in younger reps. 3 months later, they had to bring back consultants to fix the mess. That got my attention. What happened to her? Reassigned. Moved into some strategy innovation title that meant nothing. Her name didn't even stay on the leadership site a full year. For the first time that day, I felt something besides grief. I felt curiosity. Maybe Cynthia wasn't invincible. Maybe this humiliation, this betrayal, wasn't the end of me. You're not done. Inez said, reading my silence again. You're just free. I stared at the ceiling. What if I don't know how to be free? I whispered. There was a pause. Then, that's why they never expected you to leave. But what if you did? I looked at the pin in my hand one last time. Then I closed my fist around it, not to keep it, but to let it go. The transition week, as they called it, was a blur of hollow gestures. A few forced smiles in the break room. Awkward eye contact from folks who didn't know whether to say sorry or just pretend I was already gone. I spent most of that time quietly organizing digital folders, making sure nothing got lost in the shuffle, even if no one seemed to care. Then came the mistake. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. A long-standing corporate client, a big one, the kind of client we'd spent years cultivating, walked away from a contract. Word spread fast. Apparently, Kaylin had misinterpreted a compliance clause, something I had specifically highlighted in the original onboarding material. She'd missed it. The client caught it. And, just like that, a deal worth 6 figures evaporated. That evening, I got a call from Cynthia. Hi, Maris, she began, overly smooth, like we were old friends catching up instead of two women on opposite ends of a quiet war. There's been a bit of a hiccup in the transition. Nothing major, just some miscommunication. Would you be open to consulting with us for a few more days, just to smooth things over? I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear every syllable of that corporate backpedaling. Then I said, calm as ever, you replaced me. That means you live with the outcome. There was a pause. The kind of silence that comes when someone expects you to fold and realizes you won't. Understood, she replied, her tone tighter now. Thanks for your time.
Click.
That was it. And it felt right. By Friday, the whispers had started. An old colleague from accounting messaged me. Just so you know, everyone's talking. You were the glue. It's already falling apart. Another email from someone in legal I barely knew. They're scrambling without you. I'm sorry they did this to you. It wasn't fair. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I wasn't ready to feel anything beyond stillness. That weekend, I met Inez at Birch Cafe. Same corner table by the window. She was already sipping her tea when I got there, looking like she'd been waiting for years, not minutes. I sat down, folded my hands around a cup I hadn't touched yet, and asked, if I'm not this job, if I'm not the one keeping things together, then what am I? Inez didn't blink. You're not leaving, she said, her voice steady. You're being set free. I stared at her, unsure whether I should feel comforted or insulted. But the longer I sat with it, the more it made sense. I hadn't been fired because I failed. I'd been fired because I wouldn't play the game. She stirred her tea. You know what they say about people like Cynthia? They're afraid of depth. It's why they build their leadership out of soundbites and spreadsheets. Nothing real. Nothing rooted. I didn't say much after that. I just watched the street outside, leaves skating across the sidewalk, people moving on with their lives like nothing had changed. On Monday morning, I was back in the office to clear out my desk. There was no big send-off. No card. Just a few silent nods and one brave soul from marketing who left a sticky note on my monitor that read, "Thank you for being the only one who listened." I was halfway through packing when an email popped up on my phone. It wasn't addressed to me, but to someone in upper management. The subject line read, Strategic Personnel Reallocation, Q1 Projections. The thread had been forwarded, probably by mistake. And right there in black and white, I saw my name, proposing Kaylin Shore to assume full training responsibilities by Q1. Current lead, Maris Colvin, expected to transition out by end of Q3. Planning process should begin no later than July. It was dated 3 months ago. 3 months. While I was mentoring. While I was staying late. While I was telling myself I was valued. I closed the email, set the phone down, and sat back in my chair. It didn't sting the way I thought it would. It clarified. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a shift. It was a plan. And I had walked straight into it with a binder full of training protocols and a heart full of misplaced trust. I zipped up my bag, glanced around the cubicle one last time. The fake plan I'd kept by the monitor, the framed photo of my grandkids, the worn-out keyboard I never let IT replace because I liked how the spacebar stuck just a little. Then I turned toward the exit. The offer came on a Tuesday. I was still adjusting to the quiet. No alarm, no inbox, no endless checklists. Just the sound of the coffee maker in the morning and the click of my dog's nails on the kitchen tile. I had told myself I'd take a break. A real one. 32 years earned me that much. But when Inez called, I picked up. "There's a non-profit I've worked with before," she said. Kepler Accord. They do organizational consulting for small businesses, especially ones going through restructuring. They're smart people, heart in the right place. And they're looking for someone who knows how to train with integrity. I let the words settle. "I'm not sure I'm ready to jump back in," I said. "You wouldn't be jumping. You'd be walking in with your head high, Maris." Inez never pressured. That's not her way. But she knew me well enough to plant the seed and let me decide when, or if, it would grow. That afternoon, I sat in my little sunroom with a notepad and wrote out pros and cons like I used to do when my kids were picking colleges. I stared at the list until the words blurred. I wasn't afraid of work. I was afraid of stepping into a place where I didn't know the rules, didn't know where I fit. Afraid I'd be judged as bitter or burned out, or worse, irrelevant. There was comfort in routine, even when that routine had pushed me out the door. Later that week, I found myself back at St. Alora's. It's a small stone church with creaky pews and windows that glow warm even on cloudy days. I sat in the back row, same spot I'd sat a dozen times before, right under the window with the dove and the broken sword. I bowed my head not because I had a speech prepared, but because I needed to stop thinking. "I never asked for revenge," I whispered. "I only asked to be seen." There was no booming reply, no divine thunder. Just the quiet hum of old wood and the faint rustle of someone opening the side door. That night, Inez came by for tea. She brought lemon scones, knowing I'd barely touched the groceries in my fridge. She told me her own story again, how she had once refused to sign off on a falsified report and the leadership team had labeled her rigid. Not unethical, not wrong, just inconvenient. "They didn't hate me," she said. "They feared I wouldn't go along quietly." I thought about that. About how often I'd kept my mouth shut to avoid being seen as difficult. About the meetings where I smiled through thinly veiled jabs. About the nights I stayed late fixing work someone else took credit for. Maybe they hadn't hated me either. Maybe they just needed someone silent and efficient, and I had outlived my usefulness. The next morning, another email from Cynthia landed in my inbox. "We'd like to formally request your assistance for a final week of knowledge transfer," it read. "Kaylin has requested your insight on several client files." I read it twice, then a third time. I opened a blank reply and typed, "I appreciate the opportunity. However, I'm no longer available for correction of other shortcuts. Best of luck." I hit send without rereading, and I felt a little taller in my seat. 2 days later, I agreed to a meeting with Kepler Accord. They didn't have a boardroom, just a converted loft with plants on the windowsills and a kitchen table instead of a conference table. It smelled like strong coffee and sincerity. The director, a woman named Felice, shook my hand and said, "We're not looking for flash. We're looking for someone who understands how to build trust and systems at the same time." We talked about training structures, about generational shifts in workplace culture, about how hard it is to keep people accountable without losing kindness along the way. Then she asked, "What do you think they lost when Rainford let you go?" I didn't flinch. Everything they didn't bother to understand. She smiled. "That's exactly what we're hoping to gain." I walked out into the cold afternoon air with a folder in my bag, not a severance package, but a potential contract. Nothing was official yet. There would be follow-ups, paperwork, trial sessions. But the path ahead didn't look like a dead end. It looked like a door. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning between the email from Kepler Accord and the mess I'd left behind at Rainford. Not mess I created, but mess I was once expected to clean up without question. The kind of chaos that always seems to fall hardest on the people who care the most. Sometime around 3 a.m., I got up and pulled an old notebook from the bottom drawer of my desk. The one with frayed corners and pages stained by years of coffee and late-night thinking. Inside the front cover, in faded blue ink, was a message from my old boss, Craig Sullins. A man with too many flaws and just enough backbone to admit when he was wrong. He'd written, "Your integrity built this place more than any spreadsheet ever did." I sat with those words for a long time, not because they healed anything but because they reminded me that once, someone saw me for more than just a title. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Erin, someone I'd mentored years ago in claims. She didn't reach out often, but I trusted her. She wrote, "Kaylin dropped the ball. Bad. Internal audit flagged 3 missing documents in the Breyer file. It might cost us the client. Word is upper leadership is panicking." I stared at the screen for a long time. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I just felt tired. Like I'd seen a storm coming and watched everyone pretend it was sunshine. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time Cynthia. Her voice was even, professional, with just enough forced warmth to let me know she'd practiced what to say.
"Hi, Maris.
"I hope you're well." I said nothing, just waited. "There's been a bit of a situation," she continued. "I won't bore you with details, but there are some gaps in the handoff process. Kaylin's trying, but she's still adjusting to the scope." I leaned back in my chair. She kept going. "We'd love to bring you back in temporarily, contract basis. Just a few days of support. You know this company better than anyone. Let's be pragmatic." There it was. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so transparent I could have read it blindfolded. I didn't answer right away. I could feel her waiting. My mind flashed back to every extra hour I'd stayed to fix someone else's mistake. Every moment I let that same voice talk me into believing that patience and professionalism were a promise of protection. But it wasn't protection. It was a leash. And now that the leash was gone, she wanted me to hold it again, this time from the other end. I said calmly, "Is this about helping Kaylin, or helping your quarterly review?" Silence. Not even the sound of her breathing. I didn't press. "I'll think about it," I said, then hung up before she could answer. I called Inez the minute I put the phone down. "Let me guess," she said before I finished explaining. "She wants the optics of you coming in, so it doesn't look like leadership failed." That obvious? Always is. If they valued your mind, they would have kept you in the room. This isn't about value. It's about coverage. Then she added what I hadn't let myself consider yet. "I heard from someone on the inside. Cynthia's under scrutiny. The board flagged 2 incidents under her watch. If this one escalates, they'll pull her review for leadership renewal." My stomach tightened, not from revenge or satisfaction, but from clarity. It was never about me. It was never personal. It was a transaction. I was the buffer, the fixer, the cleanup crew. And now I was being asked to be the scapegoat again, but this time without a nameplate. I stood in front of the mirror later that night. Hair pulled back. Bare face. Just me. No titles. No department. I looked myself in the eye and said softly, "You don't get to burn the bridge and then call me to carry water across." I took my time writing the email. Not because I was unsure of what to say. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. But I wanted to mean every syllable with my whole chest. No adrenaline. No bitterness. Just precision, the kind of clarity that only comes when the fog has finally lifted and you're not afraid of the silence anymore. I opened a new message. Typed Cynthia's email. Then I added the director of operations and someone from legal, someone I barely knew, but who wore enough ties to procedure that I knew he'd keep it clean. You learn, over time, to stop trusting private exchanges in public systems. Witnesses matter. And then I wrote, "Cynthia, thank you for your recent outreach regarding short-term support. I appreciate the clarity about current challenges. Unfortunately, I no longer have the capacity to correct the consequences of choices I warned against. Best of luck as you navigate the transition. Maris Colvin." There was no venom in it. No passive-aggressive sarcasm. Just a firm, even voice, wrapped in the very tone corporate culture always praises, measured and professional. Except this time, that professionalism wasn't for their comfort. It was for my peace. It took Cynthia 30 minutes to respond. I watched the email land like a pebble thrown at a closed window. I should have walked away, but I clicked it open anyway. You've always had a flair for drama, Maris. Let's not forget, you were part of this system for years. Don't pretend you're above it now. I stared at her words for a long moment. Not because they hurt, but because they didn't. Maybe once, they would have gutted me. Maybe 6 months ago, I would have replayed them a dozen times in my head, wondering if she was right. Wondering if I was self-righteous or too sensitive or just unwilling to adapt. But not anymore. I opened a new reply and typed, "You're right. I was part of this. Until I wasn't. You replaced me with a smile and a plan. Now face it without me."
Send.
That was the moment I stopped feeling small. Later that afternoon, I met Inez at Birch Cafe. The air smelled like cinnamon again, and someone had lit a fireplace in the back corner, even though it was barely 50 degrees outside. I spotted her before she saw me, reading the newspaper with both hands like she was anchoring herself to the page. I slid into the booth and set my phone between us. "I sent the email," I said. She looked up slowly. "The one that closes the door?" I shook my head. "The one that locks it." I watched her read my message. No raised eyebrows. No wide-eyed shock. Just a calm nod, like she'd known all along this moment would come and that I'd finally be ready for it. Then I told her the rest. "Kepler offered me this 6-month contract," I said. "I'll be supervising the new training rollout. Full discretion on structure, team, pace. I can even choose part-time if I want." She sipped her tea. "Flexible power. I like it. It's not glamorous. And the pay's modest." "But," she prompted, "but I get to build it from the ground up. On my terms. No politics. No performance theater. Just real work." She lifted her mug in a slow toast. To writing your own job description for once. We didn't clink cups. We didn't make a scene. We just sat in the comfort of quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need confetti or cake. The kind that lives in the deep inhale after years of holding your breath. The next morning, I returned to St. Alora's. The church was still and warm, with just a few women lighting candles in silence. I slid into the same pew, as always, 4th row from the back, left side, under the stained glass window that always caught the morning sun. I didn't have a speech. No long list of names or needs. Just a single thought that had risen in me and settled with conviction. "Thank you for letting me walk away before I became bitter." It wasn't a plea. It was release. It was surrender without defeat. I didn't cry. I didn't fumble for tissues or whisper some dramatic epiphany. I just exhaled. Outside, the wind was sharper than the day before, and the leaves had begun to change fully, flames of red and gold crunching beneath my steps as I walked back to my car. That early fall air, brisk and full of something ending, something beginning. I thought about the years I spent twisting myself into shapes for other people's comfort. Saying yes when I meant no. Nodding through decisions I didn't agree with. Earning respect in silence, and then losing it in a single decision I never made. But not anymore. Now I had a new role, a new place, and a blank calendar waiting to be filled with purpose, not penance. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. This time, I had chosen myself. It was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Buried halfway down the internal Rainford bulletin, right between an HR reminder about flu shots and a blurb about a food drive, was a single paragraph. Effective immediately, Cynthia Creel's position as Vice President of Human Resources is under administrative review. The decision follows a routine evaluation of internal procedures concerning staffing transitions and leadership oversight. No fanfare. No apology. No acknowledgement of the damage done. They didn't say mistake. They didn't say misconduct. Those words never appear in internal memos, not when someone still has a title. Instead, they use phrases like under review and routine evaluation like we're all supposed to pretend it was just a hiccup in a system that rarely blinks, even when it bleeds. But I knew what it meant. She was out. Or, at the very least, she was no longer untouchable. I didn't cheer. I didn't text anyone. I just sat still at my kitchen table and let it sink in, not as revenge, but as resolution. Something that had been off balance was finally beginning to right itself. That afternoon, I got an email from Kaylin. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I hovered over it for a second, then opened it, not because I was curious, but because I'd spent so long waiting for someone to say something honest. "Hi, Maris. I know this probably doesn't mean much at this point, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize everything was already decided when you were training me. I honestly thought I was being helpful, learning, assisting. Now I see I didn't understand what you were really trying to teach. I thought it was just logistics, forms, workflows, but it wasn't. It was discernment, confidence, quiet wisdom, stuff that doesn't come with a user manual. Anyway, I hope you're okay. I'm still learning. Kaylin." I read it all the way through, and then again. And then I clicked delete. Not because I hated her. I didn't. And not because I needed her to suffer. She'd been a pawn in something bigger than either of us. But I knew this. I didn't need her words to move forward. I didn't need her guilt. I didn't even need her understanding. Forgiveness, I've learned, is quiet. It's not always about opening the door back up. Sometimes, it's just about setting down the weight you've carried so long you forgot it wasn't yours. I could forgive her, but I didn't need to carry her with me. A few days later, I returned to Rainford one last time. Not as an employee, not even as a guest of anyone in particular. Just a woman retrieving what she had once brought in with hope. A mug from the company's 25th anniversary picnic, a framed photo of my son in his graduation robe, and a small, handwritten thank you note from a policyholder I'd fought for years ago. Things no one would miss but me. I parked in the visitor lot this time. No badge. No security check. Just a slow, steady walk through glass doors that had once meant belonging and now meant closure. The lobby looked the same, too bright, too sterile, like a showroom pretending to be a workplace. I waited for the elevator. When the doors opened, she was there.
Cynthia.
For a moment, we both just stood there, two women in coats, holding onto folders for very different reasons. She looked older than I remembered. Paler. The taut ponytail had softened. Her eyes darted for a second like she might say something, rehearse an apology, or spin a half-truth like she used to. But no words came. And I didn't offer any either. I looked at her. Not with triumph, not with pity. Just recognition. Of who we were, who we weren't, and what had happened in between. I smiled. Gently, like you do when you've made peace with something that once hurt like hell. Then I stepped past her. Not to prove a point. Not to win. Just because I didn't need to stand in that elevator anymore. As I crossed the lobby floor, the marble cold and echoing beneath my boots, I realized I wasn't shrinking myself anymore. Not to make others feel comfortable. Not to earn grace that should have never required a sacrifice. I wasn't performing strength. I was finally living it. When I pushed through those front doors and the wind hit my cheeks, it wasn't bitter. It was crisp, early November air that smelled like endings, but carried something new in it too. Freedom. I didn't rush to the car. I didn't turn back for one last glance. For the first time, I didn't look back. And I didn't need to. The first morning at Kepler Accord felt different from any other first day I'd ever had. No security badge to activate. No onboarding videos. Just a warm hello from the receptionist and the scent of fresh brewed coffee floating from the tiny communal kitchen. The space was simple. Big windows. Lots of natural light. People dressed in ways that made them comfortable, not corporate. Laptops sat beside half-eaten bagels. Laughter echoed from a casual meeting happening on a couch, not behind a closed door. I didn't feel like I had to brace myself. Felice, the program director, introduced me to the training team. They were mostly younger professionals, smart, curious, full of ideas. No one made me feel like I had to prove my relevance. They just listened. One of the newer team members, a woman named Riley, leaned in after our introductions and asked, "What do you believe is the most important quality in training?" I didn't have to think long. "Respect," I said. "If you don't respect what you're passing on, it doesn't matter how loud you say it." Riley smiled. That's better than anything I've read in the manuals. We got to work. Later that same day, back at Rainford, an internal operations meeting was underway. The agenda moved quickly, but when the item for leadership transitions came up, the room got quiet. Cynthia's chair sat empty. No one mentioned her by name, but someone near the end of the table, a junior manager I didn't know well, murmured, "Maybe we shouldn't have let her go." There wasn't a single reply. No one defended the decision. No one disagreed either. It hung in the air like the smell of burnt toast, lingering unpleasant, but too familiar to notice for long. Eventually, the meeting moved on. I later heard that Cynthia had been moved to a compliance advisory role, still employed, but stripped of any influence. She wasn't punished, not exactly, but she was no longer in charge of people. Just policies. As for Kaylin, she resigned quietly. She left behind a short email to the team. "I need to start over, somewhere I can learn things the right way. Thank you for the opportunity." No ceremony. No party. Just a polite goodbye and an empty desk. Inez and I met up that Saturday afternoon. Same booth at Birch, same chamomile tea for her, black coffee for me. The place was buzzing with the usual weekend crowd, but somehow we always managed to find calm in the middle of it. We didn't talk about Rainford. We didn't have to. She looked at me over the rim of her mug and asked, "Do you ever regret not staying?" I shook my head slowly, breathing in the cinnamon in the air.
No.
I think God opened the right door. I was just too busy staring at the hallway to notice. She didn't nod or smile or say something profound. She just reached over and touched my wrist, like she'd been waiting years to hear me say that out loud. The next morning, I went to St. Alora's alone. The stained glass glowed gold and red in the early light. I stood just outside the chapel entrance, coat buttoned up tight, hands tucked into my sleeves. I didn't go inside. Instead, I looked up at the steeple and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me. Dignity was never theirs to give. It was mine to keep." I didn't need applause. I didn't need closure from anyone but myself. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the lake near my house. The water was still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror trying to make peace with itself. I sat on a bench with a paper cup of coffee and my old notebook in my lap. The cover was worn now, edges curling up like a leaf at the end of fall. I flipped it open to the first blank page and wrote, "You are not responsible for who chose blindness, only for not dimming your own light." I let the ink dry slowly. Then I looked out across the water and did something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I began to write, not for a company, not for a boss, not for a client.
Just for me.
Before we close, I just want to leave you with this. Sometimes the hardest part isn't what they did to us. It's how long we stayed quiet, hoping they'd see our worth without us having to shout. If this story reminds you of something you've lived through, maybe a job, a person, a place that made you forget how strong you really are, I hope you know this. It's never too late to walk away with your head held high. You don't owe anyone your silence. And if this story stayed with you, even for a moment, I'd love to have you with me next time. There are more stories to tell, some painful, some healing, and maybe, just maybe, they'll help us all feel a little less alone. Take care of yourself. You matter.